what would be required to repair the damage that has been done? What would be required to restore Black America to its full economic possibility? That conversation has been had by some great minds, but I'm excited to bring in another amazing mind, an incredibly smart and vibrant mind who will help us think about Black repair and Black reparations. His name is Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter. He's a professor of sociology and African American studies at UCLA, and he's the author of Radical Reparations: Healing the Soul of a Nation. Now, in this book, Dr. Hunter challenges America to think beyond just checks and policies when it comes to reparations. He talks about healing. He talks about cultural and economic and spiritual healing. And he sees it not just as a Black project, but as a national project. Now, one of his most compelling ideas is the concept of labor acknowledgments. It's a way to recognize the stolen labor of Black people that built this nation in the same way that we do those land acknowledgments, those indigenous land acknowledgments. We need a little bit of that too. Now, from his essays in Newsweek and USA Today to his groundbreaking scholarship at UCLA, Dr. Hunter has been pushing the conversation forward, reminding us that real freedom is more than symbolism. It is about repair. Dr. Hunter, welcome to Night School.
Peace, my good brother, and prosperity.
I need both. I need both right now. Talk to me about, first of all, this idea of repair. I want to start with a very basic question, because there are going to be some people in the audience that are already going to be mad because they're going to hear reparations and they're going to hear more than just a check. And what they're going to think that means is we don't need no check.
Yeah.
So what is reparations for you?
Yeah, the first thing is just back to the love of words. My dad used to play Scrabble with me all the time. And you start to learn what the 7-letter words are, the power of the TION. And the root of that word reparation is repair. Now, most people, when you poll them or ask them interpersonally, they like the idea of the word repair. Something happens when it turns to reparation. And what's important here is that people understand reparation as the word meaning a state of repair. That means, for example, when we say exaltation, a state of being exalted. If we say reparation, what we're talking about is holding the states accountable for constitutionalizing, sanctioning, and legalizing the form of trafficking that we call human trafficking now, but was called slavery at the time, where you are transporting and owning people for a living and to make money. So when people hear reparation, they're told that it's individual families. And you often hear people say, well, my family wasn't here. They came through Ellis Island, or my family came in 1970 or 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And slavery was over. And two things. The first thing is that when people are talking about reparation, they're not talking about individuals and individual families. They're talking about holding the federal, state, and local governments accountable for sanctioning, legalizing, and legislating slavery as legal. In addition, I also like to say, for those who say they came later, is to remember that America is well known for its love of slavery. It is a part of its international reputation. So, for example, if I decide to leave right now and move to Australia, I may have just gotten there on what is today, November the 4th, 2025. But I know that the nation came to be because of its killing of Aboriginal people. It is a part of its reputation. So it's also important for people to, one, get out of this mindset that's fed by the steady diet of misinformation, that it is about you individually paying individual money, and instead about a conversation holding the federal, state, and local governments accountable for what they actually legislated and made permitted.
That is helpful. So again, when people actually, let me keep pushing. So if for the person who says reparations is a check and nothing more, are they off base?
I think that they're a little short-sighted. Let me say that. So when I was doing a lot of the research for what became the book Radical Reparations, I started off thinking a lot about the check. I came into it discovering the Freedmen's Bank and all of the money that was lost in the Freedmen's Bank in 1874, upwards of $1 billion of Black people's money. So that's clearly a check. And then I discovered a little boy named Sambo who's buried in a grave in northern England. And I listened to a Black woman poet elevate his spirit beyond that grave. And what she said, her name is Sue Andy in Manchester. And she said effectively that rising from the grave, he travels to the shores of Nigeria where he had not been in over 200 years. And he is greeted by his mother's smile, and he smiles back. And it's a smile he had not saw or provided in 200 more years. And I thought about that a lot because one of the first pieces of technology that enslaved Black people experienced was an iron bit that was placed in your mouth. And that iron bit prevents you from smiling. And what's important about your smile are two things. One, that it is actually what promotes a healthy immune system, is directly tied to your thymus gland system. It's biologically and anatomically anchoring your ability to heal yourself. And for people who want to know the deep part, is that your thymus gland system sits right on top of your heart. And so that then reminds me of two things: that Black people are always deficient of vitamin D, which is about sun and other things. And then two, that Black women are often killed by heart disease. And so it means a world where we are unable to smile because of current events. And also we're set up to structurally be unable to smile through the iron bit. Slavery is a pre-existing condition. And the smile on its own is such a fundamental form of human existence that I think it cannot be monetized or quantified. How much is your smile worth? You know, in capitalism, people might sell it. I'm here to say, I don't know if my smile can be sold. And if it can't be sold, we're then always already talking about more than money. And just for the teacher, since we're in high school and you're a teacher, what I say is that if I have a class and I tell students that they can get a check or a check plus, all the students are going to want a check plus. And that's what we're talking about. This is check plus. So it's not saying that a check is not good. It is saying we are in a check plus idea, because some of the things that happen to us, some of the aspects of slavery cannot be monetized. And I think we should spiritually reject the idea of all of our pain and trauma being summed up in a check.
Okay, so let's talk about the plus in that check plus. We're going to come back to the check one more time, but that check plus is important. What are some of the pluses? What are some of the key things that Black people deserve? What are some of the key things that would affirm our justice claim for reparations?
Yeah, one thing that I bring up in the book, just as like one possible solution that is very easy and cost is not a check, doesn't cost anything, is that tomorrow on these digital streets, Black people could wake up with an 800 plus credit score. No check was given to me. Look, you see how you gave it up just there? Completely possible. And as you know, that completely deals with the whole financial access around Black entrepreneurs and small businesses, but also gets to the point that I remember an episode of Good Times where James Evans was going to go surprise Florida Evans with a gift, and he went down to Sears and he was trying to get her like a shawl or something. And he was used to layaway, and they told him he had to fill out an application because they had just started this thing called credit. And he said, "What is that?" They said, "Well, you apply and we'll find out if we give it to you." And lo and behold, he doesn't get it. And so also we have to remember that this whole Equifax and Experian and TransUnion is a recent invention, and it's completely digital at this point. It has a lot of control over the financial access that Black people receive. So what if we woke up overnight and we all were 800 plus credit scores? That's one example. Another one is thinking about debt relief, that if there is a debt owed, then it makes sense to relieve those who are owed of the debts that currently exist. So this could be IRS tax debt. This could be debt to college. This could be mortgage debt. All sorts of debts that, again, are not direct correspondence of paying folks. And then what you began with at the top was the labor recognition. I often think about DC as a great example, where what if our CBC members, before they spoke on the floor or at any meeting, started by saying, "We are on the land of the Anacostan people that was unceded. And we are also on land that was labored, designed, and built by enslaved Africans. Every single time we're in a building that was built and designed by enslaved Africans and their descendants. That is something that is completely free of cost, but does what I would call social repair by constantly re-educating people that the past is present, especially if it remains unrepaired.
I think about that idea of the land metaphor, or the land acknowledgement, excuse me. And I often laugh, and I'm maybe I'm I'm not the right person, but I often laugh when the universities do that, because, or I'm sorry, when I'm at a university
Mm-hmm.
and I hear it. And the reason I laugh when I hear like land acknowledgments at like a university event is because they took all the land and then they acknowledge it and they never trying to give it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like when they say, when black people will say, "I would pray for you," that's the prayer. It's like when they do a land acknowledgement, like that's it. Like,
Yeah.
like
Right.
there's no plan to give it back.
Right.
It's just like that. And I think, of course, about the article, decolonization is not a metaphor, which is, for those of you out there, Eve Tuck and N.K. Wayne Yang wrote years ago now. And this idea that it's not enough to just say it, it's enough to do it. I mean, you must do it. Is there any concern that just like these land acknowledgements don't lead to indigenous folk getting anything back, that if part of our justice claim is that we need to have this thing acknowledged, which I agree with, my worry is that liberals will, or that the liberals will feel good about themselves, conservatives will gripe, but they'll do it, and then that will be the prayer. Like that will be the justice claim.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, I will tell you, when I'm in spaces and I hear it, I feel gaslit. Meaning that, okay, so we are acknowledging something happened. We're just not going to acknowledge the full version of it, especially the part where Black African people are relevant. And so one of the other tensions is that there's been some internal tension around these kind of acknowledgments, where there are folks who are Native and indigenous who may feel a certain way about a labor acknowledgement accompanying a land acknowledgement. I was just at the University of Maryland at a conference on anti-Black racism, and I noticed on the website, I was looking for matcha. I'm a matcha man, so I was trying to find some matcha. And I saw on the coffee place's website that they had a long land acknowledgement. It's very, very full-throated. It was beautifully written. And I said to the group, what about the land acknowledgement? We know for a fact Maryland is one of the 13 original colonies. So who cleared the land? You know, who moved the trees? Who put the foundation down and all these other things? We know who those people are, and why are they not being acknowledged? And part of what happens is, while what you're saying, I totally agree with in terms of like, can these acknowledgments be empty? Of course, they're empty signifiers on some level. At the same time, I also would like to feel empty while hearing the history of my people be acknowledged as adjacent to and simultaneous with the land. So the land is not just being dispossessed in a vacuum. It is being dispossessed and then cultivated and curated by enslaved Africans at the same time. More importantly, and this is shout out to Tulsa and the Creek folk who have been fighting against the Creek tribe for their recognition, is that there is on record Native folks owning enslaved Africans. So the two things are deeply entwined. And I think, one, sitting in a room hearing after all of these hundreds of years, we're acknowledging that there was land that was taken. I would like to see that be accompanied by the labor that was also taken at, in the words of the great sociologist Young Jeezy, the same damn time.
Everybody, this is the book. I want to make sure y'all see the cover, and I want to make sure y'all support this book because it's worth reading. It's an incredibly interesting, provocative, and informative book. I enjoyed reading it, read it closely. Hope you all do too. It's called Radical Reparations: Healing the Soul of a Nation. We're talking to Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter. There's a spiritual component to what you're talking about. Ain't too many academics talking about the spirit. Help me understand.
Yeah, you know, when I got into the Smile, and I know you've seen a version of this discussion, it immediately took me into being a student what is smiling? What is the origination? You know, one of the places I found it was in the autobiography Prior Convictions by the legendary Ascended Master sociologist Richard Pryor, where he says he's a light worker because he takes dark things and he makes them light so that we can laugh because laughing is sacred. And so
Mm.
it's like, okay, what is that? Okay, now let me go into more information. And then it takes me into the Kirk Franklin smile. You
Ooh,
know,
you know
I
that's my
smile
jam.
because I know God is working, so I smile. And then you go all the way deep. And anytime you want to get real deep in Black music, you go to the high priest of soul and funk, Maurice White, and the sociological elements of Earth, Wind, and Fire. And the song is On Your Face. Ain't it funny how the way you feel shows on your face? You know, use the sunshine in your heart to ease the pain. And so when I think about those songs and what they're demonstrating is the science behind the actual smile and the connection to spirit in just that one act of human existence, which then means, okay, well, what religions were being practiced? So this takes me to Professor Albert Roboteau, ascended master of the study of religion and African religions. He has a book called Slave Religion, which is based on the idea that when he was a student, all of these religious scholars said, yeah, we went through every African archive and we found no meaningful predating religion before Christianity. He went to those same documents and he found all sorts of meaningful practices. And then the way that it was transported across the slave trade. So he goes to a place like Cuba and he sees folks. He finds journals and archives of plantations, and they talk about the overseers running up on slaves who are worshiping, and they're saying Jesus and Mary and Jesus and Mary, and the owners are going, wow, they're really taken to this Christianity way faster than we thought. And so they're like, let's look into this deeper. And so they spy on them and they notice that they're lighting these blue candles and they catch them saying Yemaya. And they're like, who are you talking about? That isn't Mary. They're like, what do you mean? You know, I just slipped into my old native tongue. I really, that's Mary and, you know, Wolof or something of that nature. And part of the whole point is that one thing that we have to understand is that one, Black folks, African folks were able to absorb Jesus because there was a cosmology that preceded him that could make them make sense of it. So they're not losing religion. They're instead incorporating, integrating, and then making Jesus bigger than he was before he was presented to them. And so the idea is really to get back to, well, we all know ancient Egypt had religious practices. Everyone understands Egypt as a place, and Kemetic religions are important. So how are we allowing ourselves to think that these things are deeply divorced? And so it's also to say there's a spiritual reclamation that is due to Black people because they were made to let go of, they were spied on during their worship practices so that they could then reconcile themselves in this kind of Christian idea while also keeping certain practices alive. So that's one part. The other part about it is really about the white part. And for me, I see whiteness as a scam. Okay, so I just want to say that up front. And why I say that is because if we think about slavery before it actually becomes a practice, there were a group of people who sat around and said, what's the next big thing? The way they're doing like Bitcoin, you know, and Ethereum, what's the next big thing? What if we found a place where we could get a bunch of other people and pay them nothing and trade them all across the world and make a whole bunch of money off of them? What do we call it? Go to the Bible. Well, they call it Egypt slavery. That's what we're going to call it. Well, how do we justify it? We put out a whole infrastructure of humanity that shows that there's a hierarchy, and these people are at the bottom. They're barely human. They're not even human. So by the time everybody sees them, they'll go, they deserve it. That's what we should all have. We all want one of these. And that became a profitable industry that carried a whole bunch of empires into a sense of glory. And that meant that those folks made a deal to sell an aspect of their humanity and then also implicitly put everybody else on that same idea so that when they saw them being auctioned, they saw Black babies being auctioned in broad daylight, they didn't see themselves in that. They shattered that mirror that connects us to each other. That is also a spiritual consequence of slavery. So when we're thinking about a healing, it is about a full healing of our actual humanity, which is the most sacred thing that we possess.
Who is we, right? And the reason I ask that, as I'm sure you could imagine, is because in recent years, the we that I thought I understood as we, when we talk about Black folk, and particularly with reparations, has been reimagined, it's been contested, it's been reshaped, such that some people say that this is purely about Black Americans who are direct descendants of American slavery.
Mhm.
Then we see movements like ADOS, we see movements like FBA. Uh, just mention them as I have my Twitter in shambles, but both of those groups, and I'm not saying they're the same. I'm not saying they're parallel. I'm not none of that, y'all. I don't want no smoke. I'm just saying there are people who are very specifically saying that we need to have a very narrow delineation
Mhm.
of who reparations is for, at least in the context of the United
Yeah.
States. Not to say that people who were descendants of slavery in other parts of the Americas don't deserve reparations, but from the
Yeah.
United States, the justice claim is for us. And so the conversation around the we-ness of it has become more narrow.
Yeah.
And I'm not using narrow as a pejorative. I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
become more narrow. What do you make of it? Who are reparations for?
Yeah, so reparations are really for the soul of our humanity. It's a way to get back to some sense of shared humanity as the connection and to get rid of this idea that there's a hierarchy of humanity. Now, on the different competing arguments about who in the American context should be qualified and eligible, let me first and foremost say, as far as I understand myself, I am deeply of the African American genealogy. And I say that to also say, I recognize that the way in which systemic racism has operated, when we get beyond direct compensation, we start to get into a conversation of the fact that, when certain kinds of natural disasters hit, because I also see environmental justice as a deeply reparative justice issue. When hurricanes come, when floods come, it is not discerning whether or not your birth certificate says you entered in this place at this nation at this time. It does not care about what your ancestor did or did not do. If you are living in a Black community, you're impacted exactly that way. I think what I see when I hear the eligibility conversations is that those folks, for me, at least are stepping into the reparations conversation from a positive standpoint. The reason why you start to discern who is eligible is because you think it's going to happen. Okay. So I love being around people in space with people who are optimistic about that possibility. Shout out to Sounds of Blackness. So what I see with them is, let's get real specific because it's looking like it's going to happen. And I feel like, because of a lot of the other contours of the arguments that they offer, we lose sight of the fact that they're anticipating reparations happening, which I think is living out Queen Mother Audley Moore's dream, that like we would be living in a reality or in a lifetime where reparations is on the table. And I think that those folks who are arguing that see it on the table and they're trying to specify who should get it. Now, what I want to get to is, in general, and this is after years of living in Los Angeles, is when you go to a party, you get invited to an event. Now, you know what I'm talking about, Mark. You invited to way more events than I go to. But you know that there is the bracelet. Well, first of all, there's the RSVP. Okay, there's the invitation that creates the RSVP. There's a confirmation of the RSVP. It's the arrival at the event. You get a general bracelet. Then there's RU VIP. There's the VIP bracelet. Then there's the VVIP. There's the after party. There's all of these. And I bring that up to say, I think about receiving reparations as the party that Black people have been waiting on. And I think it's important for us to remember that those who are a part of the experience of being Black in America are all invited to this conversation and this experience, and that there can be layers in terms of who gets certain kinds of benefits when, where, and why. But ultimately, this is a party that is about liberating the Black experience from being seen as the bottom of the whole hierarchy to dismantling that hierarchy altogether.
So what happens, and I hear what you're saying loud and clear, and I don't disagree. But I'm watching people write in,
Yeah.
even as we're talking. And Janine is saying all this extra isn't necessary. Reparations is for the descendants of freedmen by law, period. Would you agree with that statement?
So let me just say this. We are all fed a steady diet. That steady diet will lead us to knee-jerk reactions that suggest that what I said is opposite of what is said there. I did not say anything that is opposite of that. So when I read these sorts of comments, it is saying that the steady diet tells you to be on defense. So when you hear any opportunity to elevate or expand beyond one particular point, then we are saying that we don't agree with that point. That is the opposite of what I am saying.
And you
Just the
know that's how the
same
internet works too.
Yes, just the same way that, and I would say to folks who are having that reaction, the same way that there are many white people who are, as soon as they hear reparations, are fed a steady diet to say, coming out of my pocket, it's my fault, I own slaves. It's like no one is saying that. Everyone is saying that this history that happened is real. It happened to a very specific group of people for whom their descendants are still here, are still here. And what we're also talking about is that to attend to the category that has been created around all of the disadvantage and systemic inequity, it has to be the case that we think very broad and more grand about how this works and how the repair works so that we don't lock ourselves into just check only. Because here's the thing, when you are, for example, in a car accident and you settle a lawsuit or any kind of accident, it could be bad perms, it could be bad surgery, it could be all sorts of botches. When you accept that check, nothing to see here, that's it. And what I'm saying to people when they talk about compensation as the only form, are we saying that once we receive the check, they're allowed to walk away from that crime scene like there are no other responsibilities or accountabilities that they have? And that I think we have to take pause from. The other thing, just on the genealogy point and descendants, is that we have not yet reckoned with the idea that if there were a benefit that was designed exactly that way, and this is something I talk about in parable 1 of radical reparations, what about the white people who will do the genealogy to determine that they actually descend from an enslaved person? That is not a part of our discussion.
Just to be clear, you're good with the check. I know people use check as metaphor. Is there an actual check that you think people, and I say yes. So I don't mean that with any derision at all. Like, do you think that is there an actual check that should come, or would you be okay with other forms of structural investment, as I hear some people talking about?
Yeah, a check is owed. I mean, here's the thing. When you receive your check for the job you have now today, if you are fortunate to be working, it is called you receive your earnings. So something else I also talk about is people say Black people or African Americans deserve reparations. I believe they earned it, meaning that you receive earnings in your check. So part of why the check is important is because if we center labor, then labor is about being owed, right? So the other thing about that is that when you have earned something and you have labored for it, then you are owed a certain kind of compensation. At the same time, I also think that we have to be mindful about not completely monetizing our entire history, especially the history of trauma and pain involved in slavery. If everything is monetizable, then we are saying that there is nothing else that they owe other than a check.
That is a heck of an argument you're making. That's a heck of an argument you're making. I see people in the comments again saying it'll never happen. Other people are like, it's gonna happen. I never underestimate Black people's ability to secure a victory if we struggle for it. I just think we can do anything. What do you say to the Black people? Because I'm not really worried about nobody else right now. What do you say to the Black people who say, I love the idea, I don't think it can happen?
Yeah, I would say first, so Pew did a poll, and Pew is often everyone's favorite poll, and they found that 77% of Black Americans support reparations. I think one of the things that behooves us in this moment, especially in these political times, is where there may be other detours or obstacles. There is nothing that is a detour obstacle to us really hunkering down and camping out on the remaining 23%. What would it mean for us to really get the remaining 23% in that poll over on that side? Right now, Black America, if 77% is where we are, we're at a C plus, just to bring it back to school. How do we get to an A minus? And I want folks to understand that while a lot of these debates are important, we also have to make sure that we're doing it in such a way that it encourages 23% of us to get into that understanding that when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about a fundamentally important priority for Black Americans.
But let's say the number is 100%. I think
that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Let's say it becomes that. I think even if 100% of Black people support it, a big chunk of those people are still going to say, I support it, I'm down with it, but I don't think it's ever really going to happen. How do we persuade people that this is not just something that we should all be down for, but something that we can make happen?
Yeah, I think when I hear people say never going to happen, sometimes what I hear them saying never going to happen about is on a lot of those same polls is around direct compensation only. That's often the case, that when people think about other forms, which is why it's important to always have an expanded idea of things, is that in other ways, for example, people thought Bruce's Beach may not ever be returned, and it was. Okay. And so what does it mean when we start camping out in all of the full forms of it? So I say there are piles of smiles that are lost, piles of labor that was stolen, piles of debts that are there, political reparations, intellectual reparations, legal reparations, economic reparations, spiritual, spatial, and social reparations. Those things are deeply possible in this time. And I think the more we start seeing forms of it come forward, the more likely and believable the idea of the big payback coming, as it were, through a check.
Doc, you are one of the most consistently sort of sharp and thoughtful and also hopeful voices in the country. Before you go, give me some hope, man. I always feel inspired when you leave. What gives you hope? What keeps you believing that this journey toward justice is not only possible, but maybe inevitable, that we are going to win? What keeps you believing that?
Yeah, I think one thing that keeps me on this is, when Queen Mother Audley Moore was really advocating and activating people around it, she was treated as outside of the priorities of Black politics, treated as an outsider. And now we have reparations in music. We are talking tonight about reparations. It's a word that exists in the culture. I look forward to increasing in that way. And in a world where oftentimes people are feeling like, what's the point of being here? And what's my purpose? Is that I think that we have all right now been chosen to be the generation that will witness reparations come into being in our lifetime. And that feels like a mighty, mighty favorable ancestral selection. I also think that, I never thought that I would hear about a Black man who was brutalized by the police get some form of justice, and St. George Floyd made that happen. I could have told you I never would have thought I saw that, and that I saw it. And so I think there are things, as much as things are difficult and trying, there are things that we're still seeing that are new, we've never seen before. Shohei Ohtani can pitch and hit home runs. We never saw that. We never saw that before.
He's a Philly man, y'all, but he's out in LA, so he can.
I'm just saying on the things we've never seen. We want to go all the way to Philly. Love Hurts. Okay, we've never seen Jalen Hurts before.
Yeah,
and we're seeing him, and he's winning Super Bowls. So I think it's so many things that, like, a lot of times what we don't get the opportunity to is to imagine the world that we're trying to get to, because if you can imagine it, you can manifest it. And so I see people imagining things. I hear us debating. There are tons of people in the comments disagreeing with me, letting me have it, letting you have it. Like that means we're actually on something,
right.
And that feels like a space to bring up hope.